Hi, I'm Simon Powers from Classical Guitar Corner, and this video is for my students in the Classical Guitar Corner Academy who submit their certificate courses. We have these every 4 months. Students can submit their performances and technical workouts for review from myself and also other teachers at the school, and they get personalized feedback and also certificates, which is a great way to set goals. Now, over the past year, I've done well over 100 certificates, and I've seen many recurring issues that have been occurring through technique, left hand, right hand, position, whatnot. So I wanted to address those issues in this video and also on the post on the site. You will find references to a lot of the topics I discuss on the post on the site, so you can visit classicalguitarcorner.com for that. But here I go with the top 5 issues that come up, top 5 mistakes that we have as classical guitarists. The first issue I want to talk about is right hand alternation. Put simply, we try as classical guitarists to alternate the fingers in our right hand on a regular basis so that we don't build up tension in our hand. It helps speed, fluidity, and accuracy. It can be through I and M, or M and A, or I and A, or any combination of those in between. There are instances where we do want to repeat a finger, or we can choose to repeat a finger. That might include a slow passage where we want to control the tone. Or perhaps a particular passage where we are very particular about the tone. Maybe it's not particularly slow, but we could have, and then we move on to alternation. Likewise, we often use the thumb in a repeated way. The thumb is repeated very quickly, as you'll hear in flamenco music in particular. Now, where the issue does arise is when you don't know that you're repeating fingers. All of those examples would have been by choice. I choose to repeat my I finger to make a nice tone, or because this piece is slow and I can without building up any tension in the hand. Where the issue really lies is that you as a player don't know when you're doing something like this. All of those fingers, there were several times I repeated I and several M. You can get away with it in beginner stages of classical guitar because the repertoire is often quite slow and quite simple. The problem really arises though when you get to more complex repertoire and your alternation has become a habit. This means you'll develop tension in the right hand, you'll get tone quality diminishing because of that, and you might just simply get a tense right hand that slows you down and makes you less accurate. So it's important to develop good habits of alternation early on. I think the first step to solving this problem is to identify if you are repeating fingers in the right hand and you don't know about it. This is probably the hardest part, is to identify it, because it doesn't often feel that bad in the right hand, as I said, with beginner repertoire. So the most useful way and the easiest way to go about it is to simply film yourself playing. As you'll see here, I have filmed myself playing 2 versions of the Allemande in E minor from a Bach lute suite, and this version has correct alternation. And I've slowed it down here so you can really see that I and M are flowing regularly. Now if we move to another version, you'll see that I repeat I many times and M many times, and this is quite hard to see at speed, but if we slow it down like this, it becomes clear as day that those fingers are repeating. So that's your first step, is to film yourself and identify if the problem exists or not, because obviously a teacher can do this, or I often pick it up through video lessons on the CGC Academy. Once you've identified the problem, then there are some pretty simple ways to go about working on it and developing a habit. They're simple, but they do take a while to get into your technique. To start off with, we can just have open strings, so no left-handed needed, and we can just do walking. The problem usually arises when we have awkward string crossing, and I talk about that in some other lessons. So it's important to force yourself to do the awkward string crossing. So if you're going I-M, make sure you go up and back, and likewise with MI, because on one of those directions you're going to get a slightly more difficult string cross than another. So just be sure that you're always going I am, I am. One way to keep track of yourself is to accent one of the fingers so you can feel or hear if it's not happening. Another way to force yourself through a variety of string crossing difficulties is by doing 3 notes per string. That way you get a different string cross every single time. So following on from that, we can then add in the left hand and we can do simple scales. We can do 3 note per string scales, which forces you to do the alternating string crossing. And then we can take simple pieces, and this is often what I recommend to students that really have a habit that's been around for a long time. Take very simple pieces and map in on the score I am above the fingering, above the notes, and really work on a simple study, let's say saw study number 1 from Opus 60. Something nice and simple like that, but it gives you a chance to focus just on your alternation. So step way back in terms of difficulty and have that as your sole focus. And then from there, be diligent about putting in the right hand fingering and following it. So every now and then you can check in with your recording of your right hand, and in slow motion if you can, is a really good way to check in. I will say that it's very hard to change those habits in old pieces of repertoire, so I recommend trying out this sort of remedy of alternation with your fingers on new repertoire. The second group of mistakes that I see happen a lot is to do with positioning. This could be the right hand, the left hand, or the general postural positioning of the body. So I'm going to take 3 points here in number 2 because we're going to start with a common right hand wrist position issue that I see come up quite a lot. That is that the right hand wrist is too low. So you can see here that if I have my wrist very flat, so that, let's see if I can get out of the way, so that there's not much space here between the fingerboard and the wrist, then your fingers are forced to pull up like this. There's no real way that they can go back very easily because the nails will catch and they'll make a slapping sound against the string. So with this positioning, first of all, you get a bit of a bad tone. Very bright tone because we're really plucking the strings as opposed to pushing the finger back through to the palm. And also it doesn't allow us to move around very easily to give us good access to all the strings. So this kind of wrist position often comes from maybe a history with plectrum style guitar where we have a flatter wrist and we're moving like this. And also people that sometimes worked on a lot of rest stroke to begin with, they have their wrist right back here and it's very flat and they reach out to play each of the strings. The position I'd like to see more as a default wrist position is a little higher, and as a general default you can measure 3 or 4 finger widths from the soundboard to the bottom of your wrist to gauge the distance of the arch of your wrist. You don't want it too high because then you've got a sharp angle for your tendons to pass over there. That's a bit dangerous, can cause irritation. And you don't want it too low because then we don't have the ability to make a good free stroke movement. We get stuck on the strings and the hand is a little bit stuck in its position. So just make sure that you have a noticeable arch in your wrist with sufficient clearance from the soundboard. That way we can have this free stroke motion where the finger comes back towards the palm, goes through the string, and clears the adjacent strings with ease. Now to do with the left hand, there are obviously many things to talk about with both the right and left hand, so I'm just picking up on points that I see happening with regularity. That is that we have what I call, and I imagine other people call, a violin position. So to be a little goofy, this is violin position where your fingers are stretched out like this, if you can see. that's the way violinists will play. And often you'll find also, let's say on mandolin or some steel string styles, we're using really fingers 1, 2, and 3, and very rarely the fourth finger. So we get this kind of angle where we really rely on the third finger to do a lot of work up there and not so much the fourth. In classical guitar technique, the fourth finger plays a very big role, especially as we move to more advanced repertoire. So we need to rely on it to be as steady, accurate, and as strong as the other fingers. So in the early stages, let's say you started off learning some chords, you learned a C major down here. It's very easy for this fourth finger to get stuck back here, and then when you come around to play a scale or something linear, we still have that fourth finger tucked back here, and the fingers are almost lengthwise along the strings, as opposed to square, or what's sometimes referred to in the Calavaro method as a horizontal presentation to the fingerboard. So I call this violin position, and Kevin Gallagher made a really wonderful video on the 3 different positions. I think he said left, center, and right. And I agree absolutely with his ideas in that we do use this position. Absolutely we do. Let's say we had to play this string of notes. Then we have to angle our hand so that our fourth finger can reach clearly, and all the other fingers as well. Likewise, if we play the inverse of that, we actually bring our elbow out and the hand is at another angle where we're sort of facing in the opposite direction before. So we've had these two extremes. However, the problem that I see is beginner guitarists always staying in this left extreme, where the outside of their, I guess the inside of the hand is up towards the headstock. This means that you stretch out, especially the fourth finger, like this, so it's flat. This means there's no strength there and there's no accuracy for positioning. So it's very flappy, and it also means that when you come back to play with the third finger, people's fourth fingers often get tucked back into the palm here. So a dead giveaway of this is if you notice yourself playing and you see your fourth finger all the way back here in the hand. Simply put, think of the distance and time and energy it takes for that fourth finger to travel when it is eventually needed. So what I encourage you to do is to play with a horizontal presentation or a square hand as a general default, especially through scales. And a good way to go about understanding what I'm talking about or feeling what I'm talking about is simply to do a sequence of fingers 1, 2, 3, 4 and 4, 3, 2, 1 up here in the fifth position. It could be third, fourth, it doesn't really matter. Fifth position is just nice and comfortable for the hand. So you can go to the fifth position and put your first finger on 5th fret, second finger on 6th fret, third finger on 7th fret, and fourth finger on 8th fret, and have them all down at the same time. This will force your fourth finger here to be in a curled position as opposed to this so much. So bring it around and they should all be on the tips of their fingers and your fingers nice and curled as opposed to stretched out, or some stretched out and some curled. From there we can start with 4, 3, 2, 1 down and just release them one at a time. 4, 3, 2, 1. Then all down on the next string. 4, 3, 2, 1. And then on the way up, we can do the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, keeping the fingers down as we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Do this slowly and steadily. I'm going through it quickly just to get through the different points. Do it slowly and steadily so that your hand learns to stay in that position which accommodates the fourth finger throughout. So again, another instance where you can record yourself to identify if this is happening in your hand a lot. It is something I would highly recommend working on if you notice it in your technique. Third is a very common habit that people form with their playing in their body posture and position, and that is simply that we look at our left hand a lot when we play, and that's fine. Often when we're starting out, we want to look at our fingers and the frets as much as possible because it's a complex little maze down there. However, what can happen over time is this kind of positioning where we bring our head down close to our fingers and we don't get out of it, and it makes really quite a twisted position for our back, and to stay in that kind of position for any length of time just isn't going to be good for anything, for strength, for soreness, for fatigue. So it is important to catch yourself. If you are doing this, you're sort of ducking down, ducking your left head down, your left shoulder down, and your right shoulder up, and obviously the inverse if you're left-handed, then you need to just simply reset into that nice standard classical guitar position that we started at from the beginning stages. So it's not so much a matter of staying like this all the time, more so if you catch yourself, whether there's a mirror in front of you, if you recorded yourself, or you just physically notice it, then just reset. And you can do it while playing too. You can sort of say, notice it, and just come back to position. Maybe at certain points you need it and you're really trying to look at the strings, fine, but just make sure you come back to that centered standard position. There's a similarity here between the left-hand sort of violin position I was talking about and this, in that we're just using a good solid default position to come back to on a regular basis. The third point I want to make has got really nothing to do with the guitar. It's got to do with our approach to learning music on the guitar, and that is choosing repertoire that's too difficult. And a lot of the students at the CGC Academy will be sort of shaking their head. They're like, Simon, we've heard you say this. But it is an important message to hear on a regular basis, because here's the issue at hand. For most of us, I think we're adults, and we have come to the classical guitar because we loved the instrument, we loved the sound, and we loved the repertoire. And the repertoire that initially drew us to the instrument is usually the advanced concert repertoire, so we want to play that as soon as we can. And it feels good to play that for the first couple of days, and then there's a slippery slope of self-defeat after that, I would call it. So if you really want to feel a sense of achievement and progress consistently, I think it's incredibly important to work on repertoire that's appropriate for your level. Whether that be right at your level and you can do all the techniques with ease, or it's just pushing you 1 or 2 steps beyond where your current abilities are. The trick with this obviously is that it's difficult to know as a beginner or intermediate student what repertoire might be more appropriate as opposed to what you've been listening to, like Bach suites or Asturias or Romanza or Lagrima. So the grade systems, we have a level grade system here at Classical Guitar Corner Academy, but also through the AMEB, through the Trinity Grades Guildhall, the Canadian Royal College system. All of those grade systems are wonderful for helping you stay committed to a certain range of difficulty so that you can one-up your skills on a regular basis. Furthermore, if you want to find a solution to this, is to set some goals, and maybe if you have the ability to join with other players or a society, and set a goal publicly so that other people can keep you accountable, and like they sort of can say, actually, you didn't say you were going to be learning that Bach suite till next year. Why are you doing it after 1 week? So, having someone keep you accountable is also helpful in that regard. Point number 4 now, and it's in a similar vein to the previous one, and that's the idea of playing, not practicing. I think that a common question I receive is the question of how many hours a day should I practice? And the answer is always, it depends. I think the common rule of thumb is regularity trumps binge practicing, so half an hour a day is better than 3 hours on a Sunday. And also that it's got to do with what you practice as opposed to how much you practice. But the biggest issue, and this ties into the previous point, is that we love the guitar. We want to play the guitar. It's our hobby, it's our passion, maybe even our aspiring profession. But we have to be careful to differentiate between playing the guitar and practicing the guitar. Because we enjoy playing the guitar, it feels good, we love the repertoire, it's fun. But practicing is more akin to work. And it's not necessarily always enjoyable. So I would say that for practice, it's focused, it's goal-oriented, you have some structure to it, and you can hold yourself accountable either by written down goals for that particular session or for that week, or with a teacher or with a program of learning, that you can make sure that the practice is actually being used to further you step by step, as opposed to being aimless or wandering, which usually what playing is. I think a nice way to go about it is let's say you have an hour, 30 to 40 minutes of practice, real work, where you focus in and maybe it's only a small chunk of material, but you really work diligently on it. Then at the end, 20 minutes of play, where you get to just play the guitar. You don't have to stop and fix out problems. You just enjoy playing through the repertoire and exercises as you wish. But do be careful to make a distinction between practice and playing, and then the answer of how much should I practice each week, that becomes a whole different thing, because you you can quantify what actual practice you're doing as opposed to just hands-on time with the instrument. Okay, the last point I want to bring up is to do with the left hand and the fingering technique that we use in the left hand, and this is a two-parter. So the first one is a relatively simple one, and that it often happens in beginner stages, but it can happen in intermediate to advanced as well, and that is the idea that we have the finger in the left hand that's too far back in the fret. This simply means that we can get buzz on the string, because if we're holding down the string further back in the fret, that means it can bounce a little on the fret up here. So having it up close to the fret means you're not going to get that buzzing sound, which just messes up the general sound of your piece. If you think it sounds a little messy and unclear, part of that is to do with the buzzing sounds and that accumulate with other things like string noise and whatnot. More importantly though, I think, is that if you are putting down your left hand finger further back in the fret, you have to exert more energy to get that string down. If you're snug up against the fret there, then you just need less energy to actually make that fretted note happen correctly with a clean tone. So another simple way to practice this, apart from filming yourself and just being aware of the issue, is simply you can fret some notes. You don't even have to use the right hand at all, and just fret some notes lightly in any position that's comfortable, and just focus very intently on the positioning of each finger and the consistency. You can go finger one. I'm just pressing down lightly. Maybe you can hear the sound. Second finger. It's really not a complicated matter. What it is, it's a matter of attention and awareness. So if you're aware that the issue is happening, give it some attention, some focus, and then step by step it will change your technique over time so that it's more accurate. There is a caveat to all of this in that sometimes with certain stretches and certain chord shapes, you'll find that it's inevitable that there's going to be a gap between the finger and the fret. So don't go crazy trying to always get every single finger up against the nook of the fret, but rather notice if you're playing a scale and a finger is all the way back there, you've got a centimeter difference there. And it doesn't need to be, because we're not using any other fingers. That's when you really want to adapt that positioning. The second part of this for the left hand is a very key element, and that is about lifting fingers. So in the first 6 studies of Fernando Soa's Opus 60, which I think is a wonderful educational set of studies, he outlines that in those first 6 studies we want to keep down fingers that until they're used again or until you have to play a lower note. So for instance, if we played B, C, D, C, B, we could play B, then C, keep down the C, and then play the D. And now we actually have 2 fingers down on the same string at the same time, because we don't need to move that first finger just yet. We play the D, I'm just keeping my fingers out of the way so you can see here, and then we lift the C. What I see happening very commonly with beginners is they do this. They lift the other fingers one at a time, and that's just making a whole lot of extra movement. So it's making your job harder, as opposed to this. So not lifting those fingers when not needed, that sounds like a double negative. Making sure that you keep those fingers down is going to steady your hand, gives you more strength, and it takes out extra movement that simply isn't needed. So I used the first 3 of those Opus 60 studies in the Level 1 repertoire book in the Classical Guitar Corner Academy. But you can also simply practice scales like that. You could have a scale and make sure you keep the fingers down until they're needed again. So it's a relatively simple concept. It does take a while to become part of your habitual technique. But again, if you notice that that's happening in your left hand, that you're doing a lot of lifting, you know that it's now something you can begin work on. So that's been a semi-comprehensive list. These are things that I've noticed quite commonly with people submitting their certificate courses at Classical Guitar Corner Academy, and I will provide a list of resources under the video and also on the website in the post about how you can further work on each of these issues. So you can have a look there at classicalguitarcorner.com, and I hope this was helpful. And thank you to all the students who've been submitting certificates over the last couple of years. I look forward to reviewing more of them.